You're tuned into America Talk Live, continuing the legacy of the LA Talk Live broadcast network. This is the all-new and built back better America Talk Live, where it's still more than just talk. This is LA Talk Live.
Welcome back to the dialogue. Real talk, real people. I'm your host, Starlett Quarles, and we are having a community conversation tonight with the one, the only, Tavis Smiley. And unfortunately, we're pre-recording. Not unfortunately. Thank you. I was looking for those claps in the beginning, Richard. And we are pre-recording this tape, which is unique for me, but I'm absolutely flexible to getting his voice here on this conversation. But post your comments or your questions on our Facebook page. So let me introduce my guest, who I feel we are kindred spirits. He is a fellow broadcaster and advocate for the progress of Black people, particularly the next generation, which is something that I am extremely passionate about, in educating and empowering my peers. But you guys know that. You guys have been rolling with me for a while, so you know. But I do want to formally introduce Mr. Tavis Smiley. I mean, his name says it all, so I'm just going to read you a brief part of his bio just so that we can get a little background information on Mr. Tavis. From his celebrated conversations with the figures to his work to inspire the next generation of leaders as a broadcaster, author, advocate, and philanthropist, Tavis Smiley continues to be an outstanding voice for change. Smiley is currently the host of the late night talk show Tavis Smiley on PBS and the Tavis Smiley Show from Public Radio International. In 2007, Smiley made television history as a moderator and executive producer of the All-American Presidential Forums on PBS, the first Democratic and Republican presidential debates broadcast live in prime time with a panel of exclusively comprised of journalists of color, which was fantastic. In addition to his radio and television work, Smiley has authored 14 books. Let me say that again, 14 books. His memoir, What I Know for Sure, My Story of Growing Up in America, became a New York Times bestseller, and his book entitled Covenant with Black America, which we're going to be talking about today. Matter of fact, he just released the 10 years later, the Covenant with Black America 10 years later. So we're going to be talking about that. But in its original publication, it was the first nonfiction book by a Black-owned publisher to reach #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. One of his latest books, Accountable, Making America as Good as Its Promise, examines hard-hitting truths about the issues our country faces and addresses our political leaders, corporations, and finally, American citizens themselves can enforce accountability and affect change. However, Smiley's most gratifying accomplishments are rooted in his passion to inspire the next generation of leaders. Do you see why I say we are kindred spirits? The Tavis Smiley Foundation, a nonprofit organization, was established to provide leadership training and development for youth. Since its inception, more than 6,000 young people have participated in the foundation's Youth to Leaders training workshops and conferences. Please welcome my special guest for tonight on the dialogue, Mr. Tavis Smiley.
Starlett, good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. How are you today?
Of course. You know, I have to say, you are a man of your word, because you did say that you were going to come on the show, and you kept your promise. So thank you so much, especially in LA and dealing with, our people, superficial Hollywood.
I know how we are.
But you are a true man of your word.
Delighted to be here. My pleasure. Thank you.
Fantastic. You're a busy man. What are you doing these days?
A little bit of everything. First of all, hoping this election is over sooner than later.
Have you been? I've been following it for like a year and a half.
Yeah,
You've been on. I know you've been on it.
I've had to because of the TV and radio work. But there's gonna be a lot of postmortem done on this.
I believe so too.
A lot of postmortem. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. I've been saying consistently that this election is fundamentally about what kind of nation we're going to be. Who are we really as a people?
Absolutely.
The ideals that we profess, the IDEALS, the ideals we profess as Americans are one thing, but the ideas that we have been toying with in this campaign are something else. So there's a huge, gap between the ideals we profess and the ideas that are being advanced. And so it's fundamentally, again, a question about what kind of nation are we going to be? Who are we really as a people? And I think that's why the election is so fundamentally important.
Do you feel we have a promising future, especially as Black people? Are you concerned about the future with the leadership that is at stake?
Well, let me answer it this way. I have never been an optimist.
Okay.
I am a prisoner of hope eternally, but not an optimist.
Prisoner of hope.
Optimism suggests that there's a particular set of facts or circumstances, conditions. Optimism says there's something you can see, feel, or touch that gives you reason to believe that things are going to get better.
Okay.
If there were nothing you could see, feel, or touch, you wouldn't say, I'm optimistic.
Okay.
Hope is something very different, not to proselytize, but the Bible says that faith is the substance of things hoped for,
yes,
the evidence of things not seen.
Mm-hmm.
So that Black people have always been a hopeful people.
Yes, we are.
When we had no reason to be optimistic.
Okay.
That's why I say I am eternally a prisoner of hope, even though I don't see the data that suggests to me there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. That makes sense?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So let's get a little bit back into your background. We're going to talk so much about politics, but I just want to get my audience to know a little bit more about you. You're not an LA native. You were actually born in Mississippi, but you were raised in Indiana.
That's
so
right.
Share with us a little bit about your childhood and growing up in Indiana.
Yeah, it's funny you should ask that question. I was just literally in Mississippi like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
My mother and I had some family business to do with, so I hadn't been back in a while, but I was born there. So I went back to Mississippi just last weekend to do some work with my mom. But my mother is from Mississippi. My father's from Georgia. My father was stationed at an Air Force base in Mississippi, and so that's how they met.
Okay.
Along comes Tavis, and then after me comes 9 other kids.
I was going to say, you had a huge family.
Yeah, so there are 10 kids in my family.
Wow.
I'm one of 10, 8 boys and 2 girls.
Where are you in the line?
Number 1.
You're the eldest.
I'm number 1.
Okay.
9 brothers and sisters. We got transferred from this Air Force base in Mississippi to Indiana, and unlike most military families who move around a lot, we didn't have to move around a lot because our family was so big.
Okay.
It became an economic hardship even to the Air Force to move us around that much.
All right.
So I think I was fortunate in some ways. I got to grow up in one place, and I put some roots down in Indiana. My friend Cornel West always says that our roots, our R-O-O-T-S, determine our roots, our R-O-U-T-E-S. Your roots determine your roots, or if you prefer, your roots determine your routes, if you prefer to pronounce it that way. But the point is that you have to be rooted in something. And when you're not rooted, things can be a little tricky for you. On the other hand, the great thing about being in military families is they do move around a lot. And so you get a chance to see the world. And so I missed out on that part. But I think I prefer having grown up in a place where there was more stability. So I grew up in Indiana, went to school at Indiana University, went there on debate scholarships. I was on the debate team, was national champion my senior year. I know it's hard to believe that Tavis was a debater.
Not at all.
Yeah. I was on debate team at Indiana, and I came out to LA during my senior year at Indiana to do an internship for Tom Bradley.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's how I got to LA. I came here for a 1-semester internship. Fell in love with the city, fell in love with Tom Bradley, went back to Indiana to finish up my degree, and then I moved to LA to work for Tom Bradley, and that's how I got to LA.
And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that, but one of the things I want to talk to you about is your mom. She's very influential.
Oh, Lord, yes.
She is who you attribute your strength to. So tell us a little bit more about Mrs. Joyce Marie Smiley.
Yeah, my mother.
How old's your mama?
My mother is 71, and she's doing very well. My mother runs 6 miles a day.
6 miles a day.
More than I do. So
more than I do.
Yeah, she's in great shape. My mother is a minister.
Oh, you a preacher's kid? You are a PK.
A Pentecostal evangelist. So I grew up in a Pentecostal tradition, which means I couldn't do nothing when I was a kid.
And you was sneaking
and
rebelling like all the PKs.
You understand.
I do.
My mom is an evangelist, and my father is the hardest working man I know. So I say all the time that my father taught me my work ethic.
Okay.
And my mother is the reason why I'm such a person of faith. So they both had major contributions to make. But the most important thing is that my mother and father were young parents. And I mentioned earlier, the short version is I have 9 brothers and sisters. The longer version is that my mother and father have 6 kids, and my mother and father adopted 4 kids. Right. That's how they got to be 10 of us. Okay. So that's the long version.
Your mom's
my mother's sister was murdered.
Children. Yeah,
my mother's sister was murdered. And
how old were you when that happened?
Well, I was just in the 3rd grade.
Okay.
And so my mother and father, literally, my mother had 2 kids, and she was pregnant with her 3rd child, the 3rd of her 6. So she had 2.5 children at the time. And my aunt was murdered, and overnight, my mother and father decided to bring in my 4 cousins because they were going to be split up and sent to different foster homes, and my mother and father couldn't abide that. So literally overnight, we go from having 2.5 kids to having 6.5 kids. Okay. And I went one day years ago and did the math on that. My mother and father were like 26 and 27.
Isn't that crazy?
When they did that.
I mean, just our parents' generation getting married that young and still being together. My parents have been together since high school.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So our generation, divorce is an option,
Yeah.
right? And I was about to say, just bringing in, extended family members.
Yeah.
There's so many of us today who don't really think that,
Yeah.
communal.
Sure. And in their instance, in their case, the thing that got me, Starlett, was that they were so responsible.
Absolutely.
26 and barely 27 years of
Mhm.
age. They're raising kids who weren't even theirs. They
Right.
brought in 4 kids because the love was so deep. They didn't want to see those kids, separated.
Absolutely.
But my father only had an my mother wasn't working at the time. My mother was
Mhm.
pregnant. She wasn't working.
Mhm.
My father was in the Air Force. You don't get rich being in the Air Force.
No.
A non-commissioned officer, so he wasn't making a lot of money. I remember so vividly just breaking down in tears one day when I mentioned Tom Bradley earlier. When I finished Indiana, came out here to work for Tom Bradley, I remember what my starting salary was.
Mm.
My starting salary with Tom Bradley, with my education and my connection with the mayor.
So this is after the internship.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
My starting salary with Tom Bradley when he hired me was about $15,000 more than my father's salary.
Wow.
He'd been in the Air Force for years at that time.
Wow.
And I remember just my mother asked me, how's the job going? Do they pay you what you wanted? And I was, I'm a kid. You don't tell folk your business, but I told my mother
Right.
how much I was making, and she just got quiet on the phone.
Mm.
I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "You know how much your father makes?" And she told me. And I literally just broke down in tears because I could not believe that on my first job, after watching how hard my father worked all those years, I was making more money than my father was.
Mhm.
So I've always been grateful to my parents, and I take good care of them nowadays. Now that I can afford to, I take really good care of them.
Absolutely.
But it was just
really good.
Yeah. It was just matter of fact, both of them have just turned 70 in the last year.
Wow.
So the money I spent on 2 70th birthday parties. I gotta go save my pennies again.
I know that's right.
I'm broke now.
No, you ain't never.
I'm broke right about now.
No,
but
you're not.
They're wonderful people, and I'm so glad that they're young enough. Again, they were young and they were responsible, but they've been blessed, and they're both so alive and so well, and I love both of them.
And unlike this, this generation, unfortunately, it seems like, you were raised with a moral compass. These kids today don't have a moral compass. I often say that the Black church has failed this generation.
Yeah.
So talk about
the Black church, Black parents. We have all failed this generation.
Yes.
I say all the time that young people would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so often they don't see it. We preach to them all the time, so they hear the sermon, but they don't see the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is simple. I mean, the problems are complex, but the answer is simple. These young folk need to be loved.
Yeah.
They need to be loved.
Yeah.
And in the absence of that love from a mother, from a father, in the absence of that, they will go anywhere else to find it. And that's what everybody is searching for, whether people admit it or not. Every one of us wants to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to be acknowledged every now and again. That's what we want. We want to be loved. We want to be respected. And every now and then, for something that we've attempted to do, we want to be acknowledged.
Yes,
we want to be affirmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can act tough and you can act hard and big and bad and all that, but that's what you want.
Absolutely.
You want love.
That's what God wants.
You want
He
love.
wants your testimony.
That's exactly right. You want love. You want respect. You want to be acknowledged. And in the absence of that, in a familial environment, people will go looking for it anywhere else. And that's the story of what's happened to this generation of young Black kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. You talked about your mom with your dad. You got your hard work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
As a young Black man, what else did you garner from him? What did you learn from him? What did he teach you as a Black man?
Yeah, my father didn't say a whole lot. He was a very quiet man, and I'm amazed. I was actually teasing him about this the other day. My dad somehow one of my 31 nieces and nephews.
31. You know them all?
Yeah, I know them all. Don't ask me to call all their names. Not their middle names especially. But one of my nieces and nephews has taught my dad recently how to text.
Okay.
And so my dad now is texting me.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up one morning and my dad had sent me a text and said, he says, hey, he calls me number one. Hey, number one.
That's cute.
He texted, he says, hey, number one, just wanted to tell you how much I love you.
Nice.
And I was thinking about you and I woke up this morning. Hope you have a great day. Man, I saved that text for like weeks and weeks and weeks.
Did he tell you that when you were growing up?
He didn't. He didn't. That's what I'm trying to say. My father was so busy working all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to, I'm not name dropping, but there's a point here. Denzel Washington and I are friends, and we box at the same gym every morning. So I saw Denzel literally just this morning. And I hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks because he's been editing his new film, Fences, which comes out on Christmas Day.
Fantastic.
And so Denzel and I were talking about it this morning, and I was saying to him, man, I saw the trailer the other day, and that scene where you're in, it's August Wilson play, Fences. Right. I said, the scene where you're in the yard talking to your son, and the son says to the father, do you love me? And Denzel's character says, do I love you? Do I love you? Do you eat every day?
Right.
You got clothes on your back? I'm not Denzel Washington, but it's just a powerful scene of this father in dialogue with his son. But the son felt the need for whatever reason to just ask his father,
and to hear it.
Do you love me?
Yeah.
I need to hear it.
Yeah.
And so my father, that scene reminded me of my father so much, because my father showed how much he loved us by working like a dog day in and day out to take care of his kids, 4 kids that he didn't birth, but he agreed to bring in. And then my grandmother, Big Mama, got sick, and she moved in with us. So there were 13 people. There were 13 of us in a 1-bathroom, 3-bedroom trailer. I didn't grow up in a house, in a trailer park. 1 bathroom, 3 bedrooms, 13 people. And I never heard my father complain one day in his life about raising kids who weren't his, about taking care of his mother-in-law. My father never complained. He went to work. He worked extra time. He worked. Started a little cleaning service.
Okay.
So on top of his military job every day in the Air Force, he started cleaning buildings and bathrooms and stuff. Never once complained. So to answer your question is, my father didn't say a lot to me as a child,
showed a lot.
but he showed me a lot.
Did.
And now these older guy, I can't shut him up. He's talking to me all the time and texting me all the time. And when I talk to him on the phone, he breaks down crying sometimes. Age does that to you. He kind of puts you in a different space. And I think part of it is the grandkids. The grandkids have softened him up.
Absolutely.
I listened to my nieces and nephews at our big 70th birthday party for him, literally in September of this year.
Okay.
So just a couple months ago, a month or so ago. I listened to my nieces and nephews talk about their grandfather and the things they were saying about him, and the things they do with him and how they hang out with him. And I was like, that ain't the dad that I know.
Ain't the dad I know. Right.
But age and grandkids have kind of softened him. It's a beautiful thing, though.
I'm sure. Much to my father's chagrin, he got 3 kids and they got no grandkids.
Yeah,
so he's waiting. You talk about coming to LA and working with Tom Bradley. He came here originally as an intern, and then you were so adamant about working with him. What was it about Mayor Tom Bradley that you wanted to work with him? You were writing him these letters. They said that they didn't have any more internship opportunities, but you were committed. Talk about your ambition to work with Mayor Tom Bradley.
Well, the message for young people is that you have to be committed to whatever it is you want to do. I get asked all the time, what's the most important lesson? Be passionate. You got to be passionate. If you're passionate about what you do, then you'll commit yourself to doing what needs to be done to make it happen. And I was passionate about politics and about public service, about working for people.
What inspired you at 13? You went to a fundraiser. What were you doing at a fundraiser at 13?
There was a deacon in my church named Douglas Hogan, and Deacon Hogan happened to be a member of the city council in my hometown of Kokomo, Indiana. So he's the first politician I ever met, basically.
Okay.
But so it wasn't the politician label that really got me. It was that he was one of those old school public servants, not a politician, a public servant. And everybody in our neighborhood would go to him whenever they had a problem. Right. Because if Councilman Hogan couldn't fix it, it couldn't be fixed. Okay. If he couldn't fix it, you better call on Jesus. Councilman Hogan was the one. Yeah, he was the one that could. He was the fixer. Okay. And I just saw not just what he was able to do and the power he had to get things done, but most importantly, Starlett, I saw the love, the sublime joy that he got from loving and serving people. Nothing made him happier than to fix somebody's problem, to find that check that they said was in the mail that hadn't arrived, to get the pothole in the street fixed, to get the cat out the tree. It's a small town. Whatever it was, there was so much joy. It's kind of like Andy Griffith, There was so much joy that he found in loving and serving people and fixing and solving their problems. Okay. I have a friend of mine sitting in the corner over there, and that's what he does. I mean, I've never seen anybody like Danny. Danny we've been together for years, but every time I see Danny, I think of Councilman Hogan, because there are just a handful of folk in the world who really find that kind of joy in loving and serving other people. Yeah. And they don't see it as a put down. No. You can't put them down. No. They do it because they find joy in it.
Because they find joy in it.
In serving. Yeah, absolutely. Most of us want to have the title and be on the stage and be in the limelight, but there's some people who just find joy in serving. Okay. And Councilman Hogan was that way, and so he took me to meet. Went to a fundraiser one night when Senator Birch Bayh, our United States Senator, was running for re-election. I went with Councilman Hogan to a fundraiser, and I met Senator Bayh. So now it's not just Doug Hogan. I'm meeting a United States Senator, and I'm just a kid in Indiana. And that just really reinforced this notion to me that you could love and serve people at a local level, at a state level, at a national level, and that's when the political bug, so to speak.
So did you know what you wanted to be prior to that?
No, prior to that, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't. I didn't know. I knew that I had a penchant for. I was I spoke well.
Okay.
And I did programs at church and all programs at school. So I knew that I had a gift for talking and for expressing myself.
Okay.
But I didn't know how that was going to be channeled. Dr. King was my hero. So I knew that I wanted to do something loving and serving people, but I didn't know what it was going to be.
Okay.
And it initially started out with this desire to be an elected official, a public servant. And as you know, years later, that sort of changed to what I'm doing now. But that's how I got started.
And in terms of when you were in college, that inspiration was still, to be a politician or to have a voice.
That's right.
You led a protest.
Yeah, I went to
one of your
school.
friends got killed.
Yeah, I went to Indiana to study political science. That's why I went to get my degree in political science, to learn more about the theory and the praxis of it, and to come out at some point and run for office somewhere. As a kid, I thought after meeting Birch Bayh, my goal was to be the first black U.S. senator from Indiana. I wanted to be the Barack Obama of Indiana.
Okay.
And so that was my goal. And when in my sophomore year, one of my friends was murdered by the cops. This is a black friend of mine on the football team, shot and killed by the white cops in Bloomington, Indiana. The kind of stuff we see all the time these days. But it was so rare in that era to see what I saw. And as a student leader on the campus of Indiana University, I was one of the persons in charge of organizing protest to get something done about the killing of my friend Denver Smith. And so that was the moment when all the study, all the reading, all the stuff I'd been doing to dig into everything about Dr. King, who was and still is my hero. So here's the moment of truth. All that training, all that reading, all that learning and hanging out with Douglas Hogan, the councilman. Here is my moment now to be, as a student leader, out front on this issue. And that was when I really got involved in and committed myself as a sophomore in college to being the kind of public advocate, the public servant that I've tried to be all these years.
So after your internship, you came back to Indiana, and then you relocated to Los Angeles to work with Mayor Brown. So talk about exactly what you did as one of his aides.
Mayor Bradley, yes.
Mayor Bradley, I'm sorry, Mayor Bradley. And what did you learn from that experience, and learn from him specifically?
The short answer is I did everything. when you're a young age, you know how it works. You do everything.
You do everything.
Whatever everything needed to be done, including taking his wife to the doctor's office, whatever it needed, going to the grocery store, whatever, taking her to the Dodger games, whatever needed to be done for him or his wife, that's what I did.
Okay.
My job title was JAA, Junior Administrative Aide, and that meant working with the mayor. And he had a number of aides, 6 in particular, who were assigned to different parts of the city. We were his eyes and ears in the cities, in the part of the city that we were assigned to. I was assigned to South LA.
Okay.
A wonderful woman named Ray Cunningham had done that for him for years. She was retiring and getting older and decided to retire. And so he gave me the chance to take Ray's position to be his eyes and ears in all of South Los Angeles. I had about 15 or 20 different zip codes. It's 1987.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm working for the mayor. I'm his junior aide. I'm his eyes and ears in South LA. And so I learned a lot, about how policy works. I learned a lot about how policy doesn't work. I learned a lot about what it means to really love and serve people. I learned a lot about what it meant to do that in a metropolis. Now, keep in mind, I had worked for the mayor in Bloomington, Indiana as a student.
Okay.
I'd worked for the mayor. As a matter of fact, when that Denver Smith protest jumped off, the way I handled that impressed the mayor so much that she offered me a job in her office in Bloomington.
Nice.
So I'd worked for a mayor, so I knew how, I knew things worked. But working for the mayor in Bloomington and LA is a little bit different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I knew what it meant to be an aide to a mayor, but with Mayor Brad, I just learned so much. There are a number of lessons that I take away from that. One is that he was more concerned about the work than about getting the credit.
Okay.
Tom Bradley was a very focused individual. He just stayed busy on what he needed to do, didn't worry about the press, didn't worry about the credit, handled criticism pretty well, but just stayed focused on his work. It was about delivering for people, and that's why he was mayor for 20 years in this town, because Tom Bradley stayed focused on doing what needed to be done for the people of Los Angeles. And so I just took a lot from him, but one of the things I've tried to hold on to all these years, it's not about what people say. It's not about what people do. It's not about how they perceive it. It's about you knowing what your purpose is. And if you stay focused on that, keep your head down and do your work, in the end, what matters is the work.
And you knew your purpose was?
My purpose was to love and serve people. I say all the time that leadership, my definition is this. I've honed this over the years, that leadership is simply this. You can't lead people unless you love people. And you can't save people unless you serve people. That's my definition of leadership, and all my friends know it. You can't lead if you don't love. You can't save if you don't serve. So there are 2 questions to ask yourself if you want to be a leader, if you think of yourself as a leader. One, if I'm right, that you can't lead without loving or save without serving. Number one, what is the depth of your love for everyday people? And secondly, what is the quality of your service to them? I don't care about your last name, about your degrees, how much money you make, what neighborhood you live in, who your mom and them are, what kind of hookup or access you have. If you're going to be a leader, answer those two questions. What is the depth of your love for people? And what is the quality of your service to them? So I judge leaders by the depth of their love and the quality of their service, not about all the stuff they say, who they know, who they hang out with. Do you love people? But where's the fruit of that? Do you serve people? How are you serving people? That's how I judge leaders.
So where does the depth of your love for Black people come from? Because one of the things that I often talk about here on the show is this generation's lack of cultural competency, right? I ain't never seen so many slave movies in all my life, right? We grew up with roots. These kids have Django, 12 Years a Slave, but we don't portray slaves as heroes. So growing up, how was that cultural competency and that love for Black people specifically instilled in you? What did your parents expose you to? What was it about being grown up Black in America that made you just love and want to serve your people?
The two things initially were, as I said earlier, Councilman Hogan. Seeing this Black man love and serve Black people. So having a living epistle that I could watch every day. And then I started doing my first ever internship before I ever knew what the word was working with Councilman Hogan. I would go to his house and help him respond to letters and open mail. And it's just a little small town, so his office was in his house, So having an example in front of me, a living epistle, as I said, every day, who loved and served Black people and found joy in doing that was my first example. And then the more I keep repeating myself, but I can't say this enough because, again, my friends know this. The more I came to understand who Martin Luther King Jr. was. And I don't mean the King that we think we know about. I Have a Dream. I ain't talking about that. I have a book about King, as you know, that I wrote a couple of years ago. It's becoming a movie. J.J. Abrams of Star Wars fame and I are doing a movie.
Is that right? When is it coming out? Just to digress for a little bit.
We haven't announced a date yet. We're literally
Fantastic.
we're on the second draft of the screenplay right now. So I'm just honored to. We okay?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just honored to be with JJ doing it, given who he is. But I wrote a book it's called Death of a King. The book is about the last year of Dr. King's life. And people don't know this story of how everybody in America turned against him in the last year of his life. King couldn't get a book deal. They wouldn't run his op-eds in the newspapers. He could not get a paid speech. He was disinvited to the White House. He was disinvited to Black churches. He dies bankrupt, and Harry Belafonte has to pay for his funeral. Those are the crib notes on the last year.
Why don't we know that?
We don't know it because we're stuck in 1964 when he gave the I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. He's dead far too soon, but he's not dead until he's dead. He lives 5 years after the March on Washington. I said 64, 63 is the March on Washington. So he lives 5 years later. And in the last year, because he came out so vehemently against the war in Vietnam, everybody turned against him.
Even his own people?
His own people. The last poll taken in his life, Harris poll, almost 3/4 of the American people thought he was irrelevant. 3/4 of the American people. But here's the number. Almost 60% of Black people thought he was persona non grata. 60% of his own people. The president of the NAACP, Roy Wilkins, came out publicly against Dr. King because of his opposition to the war. Roy Wilkins in NAACP. At the Urban League, Whitney Young came out publicly against Dr. King. Carl Rowan, the most renowned Black journalist of his day, came out publicly against Dr. King. And what Thurgood Marshall, yes, that Thurgood Marshall, what he said about Dr. King, I can't even repeat on this radio program.
It's internet. Yes, you can.
He said, well, I wouldn't, though. My mama may be listening. The point is that the bourgeois elite Negroes came out against him because they were mad at Martin, because Martin was in a tete-a-tete with Lyndon Johnson in the White House. They'd worked together to pass the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. So Lyndon Johnson had really been the best friend Black folk had in the White House since Lincoln freed the slaves. And Black folk, the bourgeois elite, were like, why are you pissing off Lyndon Johnson? So they didn't like that. The younger Blacks, the bourgeois elite Negroes, the younger Negroes weren't into Dr. King because this is now, this is 67, 68. They got their fist in the air. They want Black power. They're down with Stokely Carmichael. They're down with Huey P. Newton.
The Panthers.
They don't want, Martin is too passive for them. Too passe and too passive. And so he has no constituency even inside of Black America. And so the last year of his life, he dies he never lost hope. He kept organizing the Poor People's Campaign. But that Negro was persona non grata. He was so toxic in the last year of his life that Black folk, some major Black folk, didn't want to be seen in pictures with Martin Luther King. He was just that toxic. So it's a story about him we don't know. But if you think that King is at his best Yet I have a dream. You don't know him.
Right.
He's at his best as we are in those dark hours in our lives when everybody turns against us. That's who I get to know who Starlett really is.
Right.
In the dark moments when nobody wants to be around you, when you've been abandoned, when you've been isolated, because the truth that you are telling is so subversive that Negroes can't handle it.
Yeah.
And when they turn their back on you, that's when we see who you really are.
I'm so glad you said that, because I am going to talk to you about, how Black people don't want to be held accountable.
Sure.
But I want to fast forward and thank you for that insight on Dr. King, because I think it's so crucial that we better appreciate his contribution, right, and not just kind of have him as this icon, and not really, because I even say that about the Montgomery bus boycott movement, right? Like our generation didn't understand that was more economic as well as it was political. That's really where
with King we get
our
caught
power
up,
is.
with King we get so caught up in his iconography that we lose sight of his humanity.
Yes.
And this book, Death of a King, is not about the iconography, it's about the humanity and what this man went through in the last year that most of us don't know.
When do you have time to write books?
It's a process. I have a system now. I've written, about this last book, the Michael Jackson book, was the last one, I guess. That's book number 21. I'm up to 21 now. But the point is that I have
21.
I have a system now where I work with my research team to get the research done. And the actual writing of the book, I stopped doing speeches. I stopped traveling for 3 months. If I sit down for 3 solid months and just write, I can actually get the book written, and then we go into the editing. So it takes me about 3 months to actually sit and write. But I've been doing it for so long, I have a system about how I get that in.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, your quickly about your political career, because you did run for LA City Council.
I did.
You came in 4th place out of 15. What was that experience like for you? I mean, when you see these candidates going around, I'm sure you can sympathize with them, to some degree. But first of all, what made you want to run?
Yeah.
Wanted
to love and serve people.
And you were running for
city council
for South LA.
Yeah.
And so, how was that experience?
It was a great experience. I wouldn't change it for anything, for a number of reasons. One, because I'd worked for the mayor in Bloomington, I'd worked for Tom Bradley. It was the next logical progression for me to want to be on the city council. But I was running against an incumbent, and so it's always hard to beat incumbents. I learned about the incumbency effect, the stuff I'd been studying in college. I saw firsthand about how difficult it is to raise money, how difficult it is to beat an incumbent when they get entrenched. So that was a lesson learned. But the most important lesson for me, aside from meeting people and expressing myself and making an argument and getting votes and campaigning, I learned all of that stuff, of course. But the most important lesson for me was at the end when I lost.
I was going to ask you, what lesson did you get from losing?
I talk about this in this book, 50 for Your Future. It's a book here of 50 short stories of lessons I've learned along the way. Again, it's called 50 for Your Future. One of the lessons in that book is that rejection can be redirection. You have to look at rejection as redirection.
Okay.
So the voters rejected me. I didn't win. But it was that rejection that led to my redirection. I'm doing all the stuff that I'm doing now because I lost that city council race.
Right.
If I'd won that council race, I might still be running around trying to figure out what seat I'm running for next, because I've been termed out of the one that I'm in, rather than being clear about why I was doing what I was doing and where I was going to do it. So losing that race, that rejection redirected me to doing all the stuff that I've been blessed to do in the media over these years. So I look back at it with great appreciation for what happened.
So did that kill your aspirations to want to be in political office after that?
The loss didn't kill it.
Okay.
What killed it was finding where I was really supposed to be.
Okay.
And that's where I am now.
Absolutely.
So what killed it? I have no interest in running for office ever again. But what killed it was not the loss, but it was the discovery, discovering what I was put here to do.
What type of challenges did you have as a young professional running for a public office? Because now you see these millennials who need to kind of take the baton. I mean, the baton.
Sure.
So what is your lessons that you would say to young, Black millennials or young professionals who are looking to take political office?
I encourage young folk to be involved in the process. I encourage young folk to run, but I encourage them to run for the right reasons. I see not enough young folk running for office. But sometimes I see too many people in certain places around the country. I travel all the time. I see young folk running for office for the wrong reasons.
What are some of those reasons?
Status, stature, the symbolism of it, power.
Yeah.
They're running for the wrong reasons. They don't have any history. They have no history of loving and serving people, and then they pop up, want to run for office. One day you on a reality show, next day you're doing this, next day you're doing that, next day you're running for Congress. Well, how did that happen?
Right.
And where was the love and service that you exhibited to express to us that you really cared enough about us to deserve our vote?
Right.
I mean, by the time that I ran for city council, I'd been a student leader in college. I had worked for the mayor of Bloomington. I had worked for Pat Russell. We skipped past that, but that's no problem. I'd worked for Pat Russell, who was the president of the city council in the district where we sit right now. I was Pat's aide in this part of the city in Westchester. Nice. So I'd worked for Pat Russell, the city council president. I'd worked for Tom Bradley. I'd worked for Mark Ridley Thomas at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, at a community-based organization. I ran for office at 26.
You had a track record.
But I ran at 26. But I'd done all of that by the time I turned 26. And I see too many people sometimes whose last name makes them famous or known to voters. They ain't done nothing.
Yes.
But your last name gives you an opportunity, or who you know gives you an opportunity. Somebody picks you and makes you, a star.
Yes.
But you haven't really done anything. It's your turn, but you ain't really done nothing. I don't like that.
I don't like that.
And I don't vote for people like that. Okay. I don't vote for you. I want to see a track record of loving and serving people before you get my vote.
Fantastic. You eventually transitioned to radio and TV. So why did you feel it was so important for you to share your views on race and politics? And at the time, who were you speaking to? Were you speaking to your peers? Were you speaking to Black people? Who was your message for?
The opportunity came because I'd run for city council here in LA, because I lost. But I had gotten enough votes and enough support and raised enough money to realize that I had something to say that people resonated with.
Okay.
Because you don't win doesn't mean people don't resonate with what you have to say.
Okay.
Bernie Sanders didn't win.
Okay.
But a whole lot of folk resonated with what Bernie had to say.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad he said it, and I'm glad he's still saying it. And I felt the same way about my race. I lost, but the evidence was clear that I had something to say and people listened to it. And so what I did, long story short, was to create an opportunity. And sometimes when you look for opportunities, they aren't there. You have to create them.
Yeah.
I needed something. I'd planned when I lost to run for office again. I'd done reasonably well the first time, but running against an incumbent. She couldn't run the next time around. So it's going to be a wide open seat. So I'm like, I got a plan to get ready to run in 4 years. What do I need? I need a job that's going to keep my name out front, that's going to pay me some money to take care of these bills, and that's going to give me an opportunity to be heard on the issues that matter in this city. Okay. Those are my 3 criteria. How do I make some money to pay these bills? How do I keep my name out front? And how can I be in a position to talk about issues that matter? That job didn't exist, because anybody that wants to run for re-election or run again wants a job that does that for 4 years. Keep your name out front, pay your bills, let you be heard on the issues. Absolutely. That platform didn't exist. I created it with a little program called the Smiley Report.
And that was on KJLH?
Before KJLH, I was on KGFJ on the AM dial. Then I jumped to KGFJ. I was on KGFJ, the oldies, the dusties.
I remember.
And I jumped to KJLH because one day Stevie Wonder called me. And had heard me on KGFJ. He said, that commentary is banging. Would you like to come to FM? Would you like to come to KGLH? A bigger audience, yada, yada, yada. Stevie called me, made the offer, and I jumped to KGLH, and the rest is history. And so that's how I got started. But that opportunity wasn't there. I had to create it to give me what I wanted. And once I got into that, one thing just led to another. And I never got back to running for office again because the platform just kept growing and growing and growing. And here I am now. On Starlett.
On the dialogue with Starlett Quarles.
I'm at the top of the mountain now.
In 2000, you began hosting the annual town hall called the State of Black Union. And I used to love watching those.
I enjoyed doing it.
So talk about your goals and objectives of those series of town halls and what happened to them.
The goals and objectives were met. There were not only great conversations that came out, a lot of local organizations were started because they were empowered by those events every year on C-SPAN. So a lot of local organizations were started. Various chapters were started. All kinds of communities did that same kind of gathering in their communities locally. So I got invited. I still get invited to these conversations that happen across the country that started on an annual basis in local cities because they wanted to replicate what we were doing on the national stage. The point was very simply to bring together all the brightest thought leaders, opinion makers, influencers in our country in Black, so that folk could see what we had to say about the issues of the day. Now, keep in mind, here's how fast technology works. When all of this started, there was no Black blogosphere. There weren't people like you doing what you do now. There weren't a bunch of syndicated Black radio hosts. Tom Joyner was the only one. There was no Steve Harvey. There was no Russ Parr. There was no Doug Banks. God rest his soul. The point was we were so far ahead when we started doing these State of Black Union symposia that all these other platforms didn't even exist. There was no Black Twitterverse. There was no Black Lives Matter. None of that stuff existed. There wasn't no Barack Obama even thought of when we started doing this all these years ago. It was an occasion once a year. I mean, just imagine. There was such a dearth and such a paucity of places for Black people to come talk about issues that mattered that just one day a year, we brought together all these brilliant Black minds and put them on C-SPAN so we would have our say once a year. And that's why it lasted all day, a morning panel, afternoon panel, because we ain't going to talk but once a year. We're going to take up all day on
C
C-SPAN.
Absolutely.
And the ratings on that thing were humongous. And every year C-SPAN told me it was always the most ordered videotape of the year. Now everything is downloadable. Back then you had to order the videotape. Yeah. That's how long ago this was. So the mission was to get us together to talk, to put these issues out there and let the country hear from us. And then you fast forward a few years and now we have all these other platforms. I'm glad we have them now. But when there were no other platforms, we created that platform.
Yeah, a matter of fact, truth be told, it inspired me in 2013. I had a panel called A Dialogue of Black LA.
Wonderful.
And at the time, Eric Garcetti and Wendy Gruhl were courting for the Black vote.
Sure.
And so my charge was, if we're going to court, if they're going to try to get the Black vote, let's hold them accountable to agenda. And so part of and we're going to talk about this later on, but our challenge as Black people is not having an agenda to hold politicians accountable to.
You understand?
And so, so I had Karanga, I had Karen Bass. I followed your model. It wasn't all day.
Yeah.
But my goal was to mobilize Black people so that we can hold them accountable.
That's right.
And what was interesting about that whole race, which is Wendy Gruhl had every Black endorsement in LA and still lost.
Yeah. Wendy and I know Wendy and Eric both very well. Wendy and I worked together when I started with Tom Bradley. Wendy was there. So Wendy and I worked together in the mayor's office. And Garcetti's father was the DA when I worked for Tom Bradley. So I know his father very well and knew him through his father. And Wendy and I worked together. So I knew both of them in that race. And it was fascinating for me to see how that played out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to kind of bring us fast forward to Obama.
Sure.
When Obama first came on the scene in 2007, 2008, how did you feel about him running for president?
I knew him. He'd been friends.
Okay.
He was a friend of mine in Chicago. He had worked with my foundation.
Okay. Had he been on your show prior to that?
Oh, many times.
Okay, all right.
Well, actually, that's not true. When I first met him, he was still an Illinois state senator.
Okay.
So that's when I met him. We talked, and I knew he had bigger plans, but he was in the Illinois State Senate and started working with my foundation, the chapter that we had basically in Chicago. So every time I would go to Chicago, we'd hang out and talk and yada, yada, yada. So I knew him as a friend and knew him as a brother and supported my foundation in Chicago. And then he ran for the U.S. Senate, and he started appearing on my national television program when he was running for the Senate. And while he was in the Senate, he was on a bunch of times. He's been on my program probably a dozen times over the years. And then the campaign for president, jumped off. And he and I had to talk about it, a long talk. And I said to him, your job is to run for president, and my job is to hold you accountable. And I expect.
So he knew that going in, that you were going to hold him accountable.
We both talked about it.
Okay.
And every time we talked on the phone, when he was running for president, he called me regularly.
Okay.
Called me regularly. And at my office, they'd say, Senator Obama's on the phone. And they'd be all excited because Obama was on the phone. And so he called my office. He called my house. He called my cell number. So we talked all the time.
Did you think he had a chance?
It was uncertain in the beginning because Hillary was just so well known in the Black community. And so whether he had a chance or not was really irrelevant. I was glad to see him run.
Okay,
he was part of that Shirley Chisholm, Jesse Jackson tradition. So I was happy to see him run. I did not discourage him from running.
Okay.
And so when he got in the race, he called me consistently, asked for my advice, and talked about this, that, and the other. And every time we closed the conversation on the phone, he would say to me, I know you got a job to do. And I got a job to do. All those conversations, we weren't always in agreement.
Okay.
But every conversation closed with, you do your job, I'm going to do my job.
Okay, all right.
And that's where it was.
Okay.
So Barack Obama was very clear about what my position was.
Okay.
And I was clear about what his position was.
Okay.
And so my job is to hold you accountable, and that means sometimes we're going to go head to head on this. But there's no love lost. You're still my brother. And at the end of the day, I'm still voting for you.
Okay.
I voted for Barack Obama twice, just like everybody else did. The only difference was I just tried to hold him accountable.
Hold him accountable.
Yeah.
So where did he go wrong with you, and why were you and Cornell, Dr. West, so critical of him? And I just want to quickly read a quote that I have. You said that the data is going to indicate, Sally, that when the Obama administration is over, Black people will have lost in every single leading economic indicator category. What made you say that?
That's the facts. I didn't just make it up. It's true.
Right. Okay.
The data is clear. Go to the Pew. You can go to the Pew. Go to the Pew data. Go to the census data. Go to any data. The data is clear, and the White House does not dispute this.
Okay.
That in every major economic category over the last 10 years, which includes the 8 years of his administration, we have lost ground in every major economic category. That is the book that you have in front of you right now, The Covenant with Black America 10 years later.
Yeah.
We did this book 10 years ago. Before anybody ever heard of Barack Obama, we did this book. And the book went on to become the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for weeks and weeks and weeks because every Negro in America bought a copy of that book.
Okay.
Because we were looking for an agenda. Now, keep in mind, it's important to me to lay this out very quickly. When this book came out 10 years ago, Barack Obama was not on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
We were sick and tired of George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
He was on his way out. It was just after Katrina. And we came together under the aegis of the State of the Black Union and said collectively, we are going to put together an agenda. We're not going to get caught this way ever again. So in 2008, we are going to have an agenda that we're going to hold everybody accountable to. But this is in 2006.
Okay.
So the book comes, that's 2016, right?
Yeah.
10 years later.
Yeah.
So 2006, 2 years before he showed up, Barack Obama, we had a book called The Covenant with Black America.
Yes, you did.
This is our agenda. And when Obama showed up, Negroes were like, well, hold up.
He black.
He's black. Your brother got a shot. We ain't going to hold him accountable just yet. We ain't going to ask him no tough questions just yet. I know we agreed to what we said we were going to do. And I know we put the book at #1 and everybody had a copy of it. We were all on the same agenda, but not so fast.
Okay.
And my thing was, this is the plan. These are the 10 issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so on Tom Joyner, the 10 issues that were in that book, I worked through those issues. And I asked Hillary questions and I asked Obama questions. But black people wanted a black president so bad that they didn't want him asked tough questions about the book that all of us had gotten behind.
But don't we see that even in our local campaigns, that we don't hold our black politicians accountable? We treat them like celebrities.
Yeah.
Celebrities.
Yeah.
I mean, especially here in Los Angeles,
Absolutely.
right? We still got potholes, but we
Exactly.
waving at you in the King Parade.
That's what it is.
Um,
That's funny.
You know it's true.
But it's true. It's funny, though. It's true.
But it's true because we haven't been taught how to hold our politicians accountable.
And we take it and I know my people. That's why you've never ever heard me. Whenever you ask me a question, anybody ask me a question, I'll answer the question. But there's never any venom in me for black people. I love black people, and there ain't nothing they can do about it. We have to be held
accountable.
We got to be held accountable, and I love our people, so I'll never lash out at people. But I understand that we are an emotional people, and we wanted Barack Obama to win by any means necessary. I get that. And so I had to pay a heavy price for that. People got mad at me. People got upset with me.
You talk about the backlash.
I
how did the community respond to you? How did Black Hollywood respond to you?
I lost. I got shut out of everything. I got disinvited to everything.
Did you anticipate that? Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised by it.
Why were you surprised?
Surprised because I'd been so respected.
Okay.
And I think I still am. It's not about respect. People just disagree with me. But people just, I didn't see that kind of venom coming at me. But it cost me friendships. There's certain people that that wrote me off as their friends. People didn't want to I felt like Dr. King in that sense.
I was gonna say when you said that, I'm sure you could. You could relate to him.
Yeah, but I am no king. Just be clear about that.
But just in terms of just being ostracized by your people who loved you.
I was ostracized. I was toxic. I got disinvited to everything. I lost millions and millions of dollars.
And sponsorships.
Sponsors started dropping me. My popularity, we have a thing called a Q rating in my business, and my Q rating dipped, really, really low. So it was tough.
For how long? How long did his whole term?
Most of it. It's in the last. Once it's funny you should ask that question. It's a great question, Starlett. Once he got reelected, we could feel the shift.
Okay.
Because I think Negroes said, you know what? Now he's in for a second term, and you can't do him no damage. We can breathe. And the minute he hit that second term, my speeches started coming back again. The invitations started coming back again. People want to hang out with you. I'm getting phone calls from people. People want to come back on my TV show. Now, in the interim, it didn't stop me from working.
Okay.
I still put out books. I was still on the cover of Time magazine. I'm still doing deals at Warner Brothers. I'm hanging out with J.J. Abrams doing movies. I mean, it didn't stop me one bit. That's why I said you stay focused on the work that you are called to do.
Okay.
We don't all wake up at the same time. Some folks' alarms go off at 4 a.m., some at 5, some at 6. Some Negroes never wake up. Some Negroes sleepwalk all the time. So you got to tell the truth,
right?
And they're going to catch up with you when they catch up with you.
Yeah.
But because you get some pushback, it does not allow you to abrogate your responsibility to tell the truth that you know. And that does not mean that Tavis has a monopoly on the truth. I do not have a monopoly on the truth.
Okay.
And I ain't got a First Amendment right to anything but free speech. You ain't got to agree with me. But when you know the truth, it is your obligation to tell that truth that you know. And so what I'm saying now, what this book says 10 years later, The Covenant, is that in every economic category, 10 years after we did that book that everybody got a copy of, 10 years later, we have lost ground in every economic category. And in part, it's not all Obama's fault, but it happened in part because we made no demands.
Right. So were you holding him accountable to all 10 covenants?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And some of them he did okay on. I mean, some of them he did better than others. The healthcare thing was, it's not what he said it was going to be. He watered it down, but we got something, and something is better than nothing.
Okay.
But there are other issues he just did not measure up, and we all know it. We can walk around all day
long.
Talk
about him.
The brother did not want to talk about the race issue.
Yeah.
His hand got forced by Black Lives Matter every time he did address it. His hands got forced because that's just not his makeup. He doesn't want to deal with that. I mean, at the end of 8 years, I still ask myself sometimes, what are his core principles? Mm-hmm. What do you really believe in? I mean, believe in enough to put yourself on the line for it. Mm-hmm.
So did you have higher expectations of him because he was a black president, that he would do more for black people?
No, I didn't have a higher expectation.
Okay.
I had an expectation of him to do what you said you were going to do.
Okay.
This is the campaign you ran on. The Accountable book that you referenced earlier lays out, and people have forgotten this, the Accountable book lays out everything he said he was going to do. Now, I recognize that I've said it many times, he had a headwind like no president in history.
Okay.
The obstructionism was real. And yet you have to live your life by a certain set of immutable principles. Mm-hmm. And if you say this is what you're going to fight for, my grandfather put it this way, there's some fights that ain't worth fighting even if you win. But there are other fights that you have to fight even if you lose. Okay. And there are some fights he should have fought that he did not fight. And as a result of it, we have lost ground in every major economic category. Now, fast forward right quick. Down the road, when he's gone, and we are past this moment of celebrating 8 years and what he did, in fact, get accomplished, the historians are going to go to work. And the scientists are going to go to work. And the data is going to start kicking out. And this brother is going to spend the rest of his life trying to explain why on his watch, the first black president, the bottom fell out for black America economically. He's going to spend the rest of his life trying to explain that. Mark my word, I predicted in his book, there's going to be a chapter about this. He's going to have to try to explain why, with all the hopes and dreams and aspirations that black people had of him, he did not deliver substantively for black people. He did symbolically, but not substantively.
You think he will, after he gets out of office, you think he'll do more for black people?
He's going to do a whole lot more when he's gone.
Okay.
That project he announced, My Brother's Keeper, he can spend a whole lot of time doing that. But the point is, it's after the fact.
It's after the fact.
It's still good work. I mean, I'm like Mary J and Jay-Z. I ain't knocking no hustle. It's good work. And he'll raise the stakes on it.
Okay.
But that's after the fact. When you have the power. Lyndon Johnson, when he was faced with having to pass voting rights and civil rights, and all them Southern Dixiecrats hated him, Lyndon Johnson said one day, if the presidency ain't about getting something done, what the hell is it for? And so I wanted Obama to be not just a transactional president, but a transformational president, not just a garden variety politician, but a statesman. I wanted more, because if you're going to be the first, then you got to do so well that you make sure that there's room for another.
Okay.
But if you don't measure up, they're going to give it. It's going to be a long time for they give another one of us a chance.
He didn't leave room for another.
I don't think he embarrassed us. He did not embarrass us at all. He didn't embarrass us, and I'm so grateful for that. And I mean, just the visual. Let's be clear about this.
I was going to ask you, did he give
on.
You a sense of pride? Did you cry? You saw Jesse crying on camera.
I was on. Go look at you can go find the tape. I was on the anchor desk at NBC with Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams the night that he won. They'd asked me to sit on the anchor desk with NBC. I was there when they called the election, and the minute that they called the election, the first person they gave comment to, Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams, said, Tavis, you first. And go find the tape, and you will see what I said that night on NBC. And I was as moved as anybody else. As I said before, I voted for him twice, not once, but twice. And I get turned on as much as anybody else. I'm a political animal.
Yeah, you are.
I love watching that Negro bounce down them steps on Air Force One. I love watching him walk down the red carpet to his press conference. And Michelle and the two precious babies. I love all of that.
Chocolate Michelle.
That means a lot to me. There's no doubt about that. I'm in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I recognize the value of symbolism.
Yeah.
But it can't just be symbolism. There's got to be some substance as well.
Absolutely. Real quickly, I wanted to ask you about, of course, the election coming up.
Sure.
But before I do that, black people, you got backlash from him. How do white people treat you? How did they respond to you?
No backlash at all. Because it's a different thing. They understand, not that we don't, but they understand critique. I'm on PBS.
Right.
I'm on public radio. It's a smart audience. They understand critique. They understand seeing both sides of the issue. And I don't mean to suggest that black people don't. I'm just saying in this case, we were so gung-ho Barack Obama that it was hard to hear any critique of him, in part because we saw the hell coming at him from the right.
Right.
And we didn't want to make it any more difficult for him. So in white America, my star continued to shine. I mean, I was on the cover of Time magazine, got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. All that happened while black folk weren't speaking to me.
I was there when you
But
got your
all of that
start.
happened while the Negroes said we ain't gonna talk to the, we ain't gonna talk to them.
How you feel? How you feeling about the election coming up?
Be glad when it's over. It's been ugly. It's been vicious. It's not been. It's not what America ought to be about. I think in the end, I still expect that Hillary's going to win.
What does a Hillary presidency look like to you?
She got to be held accountable.
Okay.
Black people have lined up once again, like behind her, like we've done behind Obama. And I get it because the choice of Donald Trump is so reprehensible. I get that. But if we treat her with the same kind of hands-off approach we did with him, it's going to be another 10 years of us falling behind in every economic category.
Do you think politicians take the black vote for granted?
Oh, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. I
mean, how do we strategize around it? How do we change that?
It starts with doing what you try to do on this program. What I try to do is to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
But I know, because I've been through it, that not enough people want to take the position that we take because there's hell that comes along with it. A friend of mine uses the phrase, he coined the term. He says, people don't want to be Tavisized.
Tavisized.
That's what my friend said. You don't want to be Tavisized. So I know a lot of people. I mean, all throughout this process, if I had a dime, Starlett, for every Negro who called me on the down low, text me on the down low, emailed me on the down low, pulled me aside in person on the down low, telling me, keep telling the truth. Somebody's got to hold him accountable. You got to keep the pressure on.
Yeah.
If I had a dime for every Negro that did that, I'd be independently wealthy just on that alone. Absolutely. So everybody understood it, but nobody wanted to do it because there's hell that comes along when you do it.
And part of what you and I both know is that we have to have an agenda. And why do black people feel like we need a leader? Do we need a leader? I don't even know who the leader is of the Jews. Is there a leader of the Jews?
No.
So why do we feel like we need a leader?
We don't need a leader. We need a playbook.
We need a plan.
We need a plan. That's what you need.
You don't. Yeah, my sister often says, when she read Willie Lynch, she said she thought she read the white man's playbook.
Yeah.
Right?
She's smart about that.
So she does work in Rikers Prison as a psychologist. I want to quickly talk about the Covenant with Black America 10 years later. It's absolutely fantastic. We're showing a list of your 10 covenants. How did you come up with these 10 covenants?
I didn't. Black America did. I mean, the data indicates that these are the 10 issues. 10 years ago when we did the book, we just did the research. These are the 10 issues that were most important to black folk.
Okay. Yeah. Now, what I love is, and I'm going to read real quickly, is an excerpt from your introduction. Which I think is so powerful.
Thank you.
It says, what a difference a decade makes. At least that was my hope. 10 years ago, when I had the honor of compiling and editing the historic text, The Covenant with Black America, I had no idea that a decade later, life for black fellow citizens, would even be more challenged politically, economically, socially. Black health disparities still exist. Black children are still failing in our nation's classrooms. Our system of jurisprudence is still unequal. The digital divide is still firmly in place. We still lack environmental justice for all in America. 150 years after the Civil War, black folks still wonder whether their lives truly matter. It's time to claim our democracy, which starts by reclaiming the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of Black America from the lost and the found. We have to be intentional. We have to have a plan. 10 years later, time is not on our side.
Yeah.
That is so profound, especially the part about us still needing an agenda. What are your thoughts on Black Lives Matter?
Love them. Somebody's got to speak truth to power, and they've done that, and I celebrate it, and I have supported them every step of the way.
Thank you so much. There were so many other questions. Will you please come back?
I'll do it again
when your time allows.
We'll make it happen.
I absolutely thank you, Tavis, for coming on and giving us your insight. I want to give a shout out to Kim McFarland and Roland Wirt for making this happen.
Friends, both of them, yeah.
Absolutely. My show engineer Richard Carr and videographer Ross Jordan. Thank you again for tuning in to the Dialogue. Real Talk, Real People. We're going to continue our series next week when we recap the presidential election. Dallas Fowler and Melina Lawrence are going to be here.
Two good ones.
Next week. Absolutely. And so I want to kind of quickly close with the opening quote from your book by Terry Tempest Williams. The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our own time. I'm your host, Starlett Quarles. Thank you so much for tuning in. Signing off as my mama's child and my daddy's baby girl. Until next week, God bless you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Starlett. Love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're tuned into America Talk Live, continuing the legacy of the LA Talk Live broadcast network. This is the all-new and built back better America Talk Live, where it's still more than just talk. This is LA Talk Live.
go, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway. And in the driveway is a nice range, 'cause I grind through the climb, I invite